Okay, this video is about the dangers involved when terms are not defined. Let's call it Hermeneutics 101. And as the teacher I was graced to have in Hermeneutics taught us that before we proceed in our discussion, let's define our terms, let's document, that is contextualize them, reference them from a lexicon, and then proceed to defend or to apologize, meaning give a rationale. My first encounter with what I call dangers was as a high school student with a great professor, a brilliant man, great mind, a very good, great person as far as character, conduct, excellence in academia. He happened to be involved in Mormonism, and of course he never talked about that in school. That was certainly not, that wouldn't be professional of him. But he helped me learn so much about the difference in terms. And in one conversation, he helped me understand that when I say a word, let's say atonement, and he says the word atonement, it means something completely different. And that was the first time in my life, between the years of 15 to 17, for example, that I'd ever heard of such a thing. So, ironically, I was given a lot of information, ironically, from someone in Mormonism, and then I learned from Dr. Walter Martin, because when I was 10, I suppose, maybe 10 years old, some calamity happened in a local congregation, and my parents never quite navigated back into a fellowship with a New Testament church. So I was just out there. But between Dr. Walter Martin's apologetics and the lesson that I was taught from experience by a Mormon himself, I was navigated graciously out of a maze of Mormonism. But close to home, the first time my experience with missionary Baptists occurred in a school where the teacher, it was a school that's in churches, it's called Faith Bible Institute, and we had it for quite some time, and we really had never had anyone be disruptive or not appreciate the school. That happened after the school had been there for a while, and then certain students came in who had never known hermeneutics or had never understood how to use the King James Bible, for example, the context, and how to take an English word like a concept called free will, for example. They had never been in any kind of church where that was defined by the Bible. Now, of course, my interest was the pastor. When I went there, all the pastors were very educated. Our church is located very close to the seminary in Little Rock, so it's just minutes away. So I always had pastors who were glad to teach, and especially the pastors who worked so hard when we would attend a class, and they would always tell us, define your terms. Well, this has definitions on one side, compatibilism, which is nothing we'll talk about, and this side is libertarianism, but there's a Bible definition. But what happened was the teacher, John Yates, began to use logic like if God chose us without free will, then that would be like rape. Now he said like rape, and he was leveraging the argument without having first explained that election is not about going to heaven, which he apparently assumes that because it seems to be the consensus of those who just talk without text. And then he did not define his terms, which was unusual because he did not define his term, because my first thing that I found noteworthy among missionary-minded baptizers who were called out and baptized and covenanted together was that they were very careful to define their terms. So if they said the word church, they meant what the meaning came from the Bible, an assembly. So church yes, go ahead and use that English word, they would say, but make sure you know it means assembly. And then, of course, you would learn later even more detail about it being called out in ecclesia. And if they use the word baptize, they'd be very careful to say immerse. And then you'd learn later that this was a past participial form, and it's from merge. And they'd say it means submerge. And you could just break the word down. So it was very interesting to now be in a school where people of any level of education, even people with PhDs, are said to be invited to sit in on Faith Bible Institute coursework, which that's something that if your PhD is that, well, let's just say if it's that abbreviated that you'd have to go to such an elemental course that even has undefined terms and fallacious argumentation, you probably only have a PhD that was you could probably printed it out off your computer printer. But back to the concern was that this thing began to multiply, so that when a student contacted me, I just said, well, there's the term free will had not been defined. Number two, election was assumed to be, I guess, the same as regeneration. We don't know, because when you begin an argument like that, and then of course I explained to the college student who happened to be in there, I explained to him that it's from a cosmic rape. It's called cosmic rape, which is not ad hominem, it would be ad deus, it'd be against God, and no one wants to be against God. So since no one wants to be against God, we'll go along with the fact that God did not choose us without free will, since if he did, it would be cosmic rape or like rape. It's completely ridiculous way of teaching. Now, Pastor John Yates is more educated than that, and as he reviews and revises and he grows, he'll have a definition eventually, or eventually no one will want to avail themselves of his teaching. He'll eventually drop this because he'll outgrow that. He'll say, well, that's ad hominem, gone amok. Actually, it's worse. It's ad deus. And he'll say, oh my, I don't want to say anything against God. Well, you never have to say anything against God. God could no more be guilty of anything. If God were to cast every person into eternal lake of fire, and we're all sinful and born in sin in a cursed fallen world, children of Adam, so God didn't have to do anything with us. And anything he does with man is nothing that would be unjust, because he's just, holy, and righteous. So that kind of thing. Then what happened was strange, was the students began to practice ad hominem against the student who was concerned about the cosmic rape and fallacious argumentation and an undefined concept called free will, which again, they had no concept of a new covenant church. They didn't know what it was to be called out. You know, you can't blame them. Most churches do not have pastors that could even tell you a definition from the Bible. They'll just start talking as if somehow we assume it. They would not know what's the purpose for which God chooses us. And the long story short is, it was very disappointing for them, that is. I felt sorry for them, although they seemed to really have a lot of energy to negate the person who loved them, and that is, told them the truth. That is, and IamCorne.org, you guys, especially you young people at Landmark, you know that we have written down and specifically demonstrated a definition. So we have defined free will from the Bible, by the way, and it doesn't matter that people are unhappy about it. It just matters that we're not trying to win an argument. Secondly, if we're trying to win anything, it'd be the person, but then, however, we don't put that above the ambassador role we have in our responsibility to the Word of God and to represent Christ. So when you don't define your term, you're not a good ambassador. I'll just tell you that doesn't reflect the Spirit of Christ. So we defined it. You'll see it on the website. You all have heard it many times. There's no irrational, emotional energy. There's no need for ad hominem which is a Latin word for against the man, which then happened to me. They turned on me rather than the one who did not define his term, the one who suggested cosmic rape, which, he picked that up somewhere. He learned that's how you win an argument, is just tell people, well, if God did something without free will, that'd be like rape, and everybody gets emotional. And who wouldn't agree with that? I agree with it, and I know it's not even true, but I definitely would agree with it. That if it's true that if we were chosen without free will and it would be like rape, then God didn't do it because God couldn't do that. But that just means we filled a lot of time with nothing. And then another thing we've learned is that he presented a pre-trib, which is a buzzword, a rapture view, which no big deal there. I've never wasted a minute of my life negating it. I actually wouldn't waste my time negating anything out there. There's so many innumerable constructs that just keep being generated. But he made a comment, he might be wrong. He might be wrong. And the party, I can only quote, he says, I might be wrong. So he said, I might be wrong. Well, that received quite a commendation from students. It seemed now to build up a lot of energy in that course, which apparently he didn't mean to. I guess he didn't know the type of audience that would be so wanting to be incited. But when he said he might be wrong, then students came to me to say, well, Pastor John Yates in Faith Bible Institute advocates pre-tribulational rapture for the Carter, but he says he might be wrong. Well, that's great. So I just simply asked, what might be wrong about it? And again, the pastors I had, I don't know of any pastor, Tom Stapleton, W.K. Roach, Dr. Lynn Baxter, who would refuse to define a term. They would never do that. They'd never refuse to define a term. They would never need a cosmic rape, something conjured up, which is fallacious argumentation. Adduce would be what it would be against God to make the person go along with what they're saying. They would never say that they might be wrong about something without also being able to disclose the fallible elements. And something I've learned now is that, like what could lead to what we call Mormonism, undefined terms. We even a book called Another Testament that doesn't even, you can't even look up the words. There's no, it's a textless faith. There are no such thing as biblical Hebrew that you can go to for the Book of Mormon. There is no such thing as Koine Greek you can turn to so that the meanings throughout the last 2,000 years of Christianity, which have never changed, and all the way back to the 6,000 year history of God's relationship with man, and are now having an Old Testament and a New Testament, a Hebrew and a Greek. No meanings have changed. But again, he didn't disclose the fallible elements. And Rich, for whatever reason, if he doesn't know them, then you need to be a little careful, more responsible when you pick something above another, because you'll lead the students to just have bias. Similar to the third issue, it's, of course, he didn't define free will, he didn't disclose the fallible elements, and I really believe he doesn't know them. And I think his best argument for free will is the cosmic rape-based argument, and that's not a fault of his. He comes from a place, a type of school that perhaps had teachers, pastors that were just passing along things like that. And then the next thing I was really struck about, he really advocates this, which I had no problem with that. I just was concerned when apparently they did not study how to use, that is, how to use the King James. That is, they didn't talk about the use, that is, how to use it. And then what was really striking is when I offered the students that they had me convinced they were interested in the King James Version, which is the only English Bible I use, the only one I read from in the pulpit. It's the only one I preach from. Why would I need another one since I know how to use the tools of Hebrew and Greek, which that in the lexicography, the lexicon, so I really wouldn't know how would an ESV, a EIO, a ABC, a NKJ, it's all irrelevant. So I offered to teach, which apparently there was more energy, apparently, for just touting an onlyism. And then they were going on about these different texts and how this one's corrupt and growling about all these things. And I was like, I don't think I ever received that impression from Pastor John Yates, but that has to do with me more than he, because you have to be careful when you're talking with an audience. Some people really do like to hear nasty things said about other people. And they like things like a cosmic rape dire thing, or they like a pre-trib rapture construct that you can really tell them how horrible it is if we're here. It's horrible now that we're here. It's a global war on persecution right now. We're all here in the West. We all Christians are tribbers, just like Jesus told us. We fled. That's why he gave us this United States. That's why there's no religion that is the state church. There's no church in the United States. But it was really sad because it was unusual for me. I'd never before run into missionary Baptists who preferred not to define their terms, who preferred to not disclose fallible elements, and even refused to evaluate anything in light of Scripture, and then preferred King James onlyism to using the King James. And again, that just threw me back to a time in my life before I was called out, and I was the instrument that was helped me become what I am today as far as outreach was written by Benham Bogard, 52 Doctrines. So Dr. Walter Martin, an apologist, helped me navigate out of occultism, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then Dr. Benham Bogard's book, which this was written for junior boys, so I thought this was really some deep document, but it's actually very wise and well put together. It's catechismic in that it asks a question, and you then go look it up and answer the questions as you go through. And it was effective for me to come out from people who refuse to define their terms. Someone says, well, what makes you think you're right? I said, I don't think I'm right. I know the Bible is absolutely correct. It's infallible without error. And if my definitions, whatever the Bible tells me a word means, then that's what it means. But this is how I came out. So this that I ran into from students who regrettably didn't have the character, the wisdom, nor the discipline. Discipleship and discipline go hand in hand. So their desire to disrupt and to outrage, and some were outrageous and others were silly, but it wasn't, I couldn't hold all that, the responsibility of Dr. John Yates. Again, you preach to what's there, but if you drop things into a group that's immature, like I was as a child outside of one of the Lord's churches, and at first they won't know the difference. But if you use like a cosmic rape theory, they will be emotionally aroused by that. If you overemphasize and sensationalize conditions that then support your pre-trib position, but then you don't disclose the fallible elements, you never really lead them, you never appeal to the cognizant side of man. The cognition, the mind, is what we serve God with, not the emotions. Romans 7 says, with our minds we serve God. So it all was emotional, pathological. And it became psychopathological in that they seemed to prefer to hurt those of us who prefer meanings and definitions from the Bible. And of course, those are just what can happen. You can lead people out there and go so far that it'd be a maze. There's a maze out there around a lot of things now because men are refusing to define a term. But I'm certain if you contact Faith Bible Institute, Pastor John Yates, he would give you a definition of free will from the Bible. If you asked him what might be wrong with his pre-trib position, he would tell you, gladly tell you, although I've not received any of these answers, you might find it from him. And then if you want to learn from him how to use the King James Bible, that would be a good thing to ask him, because the students at Landmark Missionary Baptist Church know how to use it. We demonstrate its use, and we define our terms. And that is one of the biggest differences between a New Testament church and religion and cults. Our meanings come from the Bible. And that's enough. You all can study this and enjoy it.